please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
The top story this Wednesday evening then, the 5-judge Constitution Bench of the Supreme Court has upheld the constitutional validity of the Aadhaar scheme, but with certain riders. Now, in a landmark verdict, after a 4-month hearing, the second longest in the apex court's history, the court ruled that Aadhaar empowers the marginalised sections of the society. However, the court scrapped the mandatory linkage of Aadhaar with bank accounts, mobile phones, and also ruled that private companies cannot demand Aadhaar. Now, this was a 4-1 majority verdict, with Justice Chandrachud dissenting and calling the Aadhaar scheme unconstitutional in his verdict. Ashmit Kumar, who was at the court tracking all of these developments, joins us now. Ashmit, take us through the fine print of the Supreme Court order that was delivered today.
Well, after a 6-year-long battle, the Aadhaar debate has been decoded. The apex court has answered the big question as far as Aadhaar is concerned, that the constitutionality of the Aadhaar is intact. It continues to remain legal. But, of course, it has been subjected to a number of riders. Now, what does that effectively mean? Well, let's take our viewers through the concerns of the petitioners first as well. Section 57, this is the section that allowed for even private entities to seek linkage of Aadhaar, has been struck down. What that effectively means is that for insurance companies, for telcos, it is no longer required. Aadhaar, they cannot seek linkage of Aadhaar. In fact, specifically on the question of linkage with banks and telcos, that again is a question answered by the apex court. The Supreme Court saying nothing doing, that this is purely unconstitutional and not valid as of right now. On the other side, as far as the concerns of the government are concerned, well, on questions of exclusion, on privacy as well as surveillance, the government's concerns have in fact been upheld by the apex court. The apex court observing that there is a larger public interest being served, that while there might be cases of people being excluded, but Aadhaar is an inclusive regime. It makes resources and amenities available to a large section of the population, and hence a larger public interest is being served, and it needs to be respected. In the same breath, the apex court also held that as far as the right of privacy is concerned, that again the apex court held is subject to reasonable restrictions, and that there are various amenities being made available, citing the larger public interest, and again holding that Aadhaar is indeed constitutional. On the question of Aadhaar being passed as a money bill, the apex court again in a majority view has held that it is in fact fair, that the parliament was right in passing it as a money bill. However, important to point out here that this is a 4:1 verdict. Justice Chandrachud has given a dissenting verdict whereby he has been very, very critical of the government. He's in fact gone to the extent of saying that the government has committed fraud on the constitution of the country. Nonetheless, the big takeaway, of course, is that as of right now, Aadhaar remains intact, and importantly, both the sides are claiming victory, so the battle is still unfolding.
I think it's a very, very good judgment. It's a very balanced judgment. Justice Sikri is a very balanced and a good judge in any case. Now, I would explain the balance in this form, that when Aadhaar was conceived, it was really conceived to provide for stopping the leakage of subsidies given by Government of India. The other part which the court has frowned upon is the extension of Aadhaar to banks and to other private entities. And I think this is a good step, and one very good part of the judgment, where a section provides that a person of the rank of Joint Secretary can authorize the giving of details in the case of an emergency or national security, etc. That has been struck down by the court, and I think rightly.
Given that that data is continues to be stored in the servers, and given that we do not have a data security regime in place as of right now, would it perhaps have been more prudent to maybe defer the application of Aadhaar for about a 12-month period or something?
No, there is no need to defer. We must start in right earnest. There are some data protection provisions in the statute itself, and some are coming now.
It's a historic judgment, and the whole concept of the unique identity number that has been accepted after a judicial review is an extremely welcome decision. There are now 122 crore people in India who have an Aadhaar card. And our estimation is that by identifying beneficiaries of government schemes and ensuring that there are no fake or duplicate or non-existent beneficiaries, we are already saving 90,000 crore rupees every year.
Now, Section 7, in the dissenting order by Justice Chandrachud, he holds that to be arbitrary and unconstitutional, but the majority view is that Section 7 and Section 8 are not violative of the fundamental right to privacy. So your first reading of the implications of today's order?
What the court has done, 4-1, rightly, is A, to preserve the core of Aadhaar, that is, to preserve the bunny baby, to promote it, to nurture it.
Yeah.
B, to throw out the dirty bathwater, all the dirt which is accumulated by distortion and perversion of the concept. And C, to send a clear, unequivocal message that use of Aadhaar for devious means, for collecting data, for sharing data with others, for snooping on you, for finding out about you, for using it as a catch-all, is completely impermissible.
Arun Jaitley, the finance minister, speaking a short while ago, says that there are 2-3 prohibited areas. We need to understand whether these are prohibited or a legal battle is needed. I don't think these prohibited areas are perpetually prohibited. Does that seem to suggest that the government is looking at putting something on board as far as the statute book is concerned, bringing in a law to enable the linkage of mobile phones, bank accounts and what have you to the Aadhaar?
I think this is nothing but spin doctrine. This is nothing but trying to make a fool of the people. This is nothing but trying to make a virtue out of necessity. They have lost badly, and you are seeing classic examples of spin doctrine. Number one, please ask the question, were you under your regime only after 2014 and not prior, using Aadhaar for the 6 examples I gave? There are many more. Mobiles, bank accounts, data sharing, UGC, CBSE. Number two, you may not have created a statute, but under the Aadhaar card, were not banks and other people asking you for this? Number three, that's the precise point which the court has made. The Aadhaar statute never said so. You were acting without statute. Now, if Mr. Jaitley means, and I hope he doesn't, that we will now bring in a new statute to do exactly what the court has said Aadhaar did not permit it to be done, well then, good luck to him and his government. Let them take another beating at the courts.
Well, Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, who was also part of the 5-judge bench, delivered a dissenting judgment. He said, and I quote, Aadhaar allows constructing profiles of individuals, which is against the right to privacy and enables potential surveillance. And that's not all. He also lashed out at the way the government resorted to the money bill route to get the Aadhaar Act passed. Kevin Lee joins us now for more on this dissenting view. Kevin, take us through why Justice Chandrachud, chose to dissent from the other 4 judges, and what were his rationales for, having this contrarian view?
Well, dissent might be a bit of an understatement. What we have from Justice Chandrachud is a scathing critique of the government in the way that it passed Aadhaar and what it was using the Aadhaar for. His biggest issue was with the way Aadhaar was passed in Parliament. He said Aadhaar could not have been passed as a money bill. This is specifically to do with Section 7 of the Aadhaar Act, which draws money from the Consolidated Fund of India. Justice Chandrachud believed that even only on this point, the whole of the Aadhaar Act is unconstitutional because it was passed as a money bill and it should not have been passed as a money bill. Going further, he said that the purpose of the Aadhaar Act may be legitimate, but there are no safeguards to privacy. Keep in mind that, of course, last year the Supreme Court said that the right to privacy is a fundamental right. So Justice Chandrachud making a reference to that. Also saying that the dignity of individuals cannot be made subject to algorithms that collect and encrypt data. Furthermore, he said that the government claims on security of data are insufficient. Of course, this is in reference to various news reports coming out of the Aadhaar database, of leaks from the Aadhaar database. He said that potential surveillance is possible through the Aadhaar system. Also, he gave a solution. Strike down the Aadhaar Act in its entirety. You can keep the data that you've collected for a year, use that year to reenact a better law that safeguards the privacy concerns of the citizens of India. However, if you're not able to come up with that law, then delete all the Aadhaar data that you've been collecting for the last 9 years. So very, very scathing critique of the government coming in from the dissenting judge, Justice Chandrachud.
All right, Kevin, thank you very much for joining in. So the constitutional validity of the Aadhaar scheme then upheld 4:1 today. Now, here's another important development coming in from the Apex Court today. The Supreme Court has given its nod to allow live streaming of court proceedings in the Chief Justice of India's courtroom. Now, the Apex Court in its judgment quoted Louis Brandeis saying sunlight is the best disinfectant, essentially batting for more accountability and transparency. Now, the court said that the necessary rules for the same will be in place very soon. And that's not all. The Apex Court also cleared the decks today for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes quota in government job promotions. The court refused to refer its 2006 judgment to a 7-judge constitutional bench. The court went on to say that states do not have to collect quantifiable data on backwardness of SC/ST quota in job promotions. This is a change from its 2006 verdict, saying states are bound to provide quantifiable data on the backwardness of SC and ST. After holding intense deliberations for over 6 months, the Modi government has finally cleared the new telecom policy. Now, this policy has been coined the National Digital Communication Policy 2018. Now, this ambitious policy aims to attract investments worth $100 billion and create about 4 million jobs in this sector by 2022. For more on this, we're joined by Kritika Saxena. Kritika, take us through the details of what this new telecom policy entails.
Well, the National Digital Communication Policy of 2018 will replace the National Telecom Policy of 2012. So it's a very wide document. It's a comprehensive policy. But let me take you through the key highlights. You pointed out the two aspirational points of creating 40 lakh new jobs by 2022 and $100 million of fresh investment by 2022. But over and above that, a very critical portion of this is providing broadband for all by the year 2022. The targets are of providing 1 Gbps connectivity to all Gram Panchayats by 2020 and 10 by 2022. They are also looking at setting up 5 million public Wi-Fi hotspots by 2022 and 5 million by 2020, 10 million by 2022. They have created a very comprehensive plan wherein they have brought out BharatNet, Jan Wi-Fi and couple of other 5 different programs to ensure a phased rollout of the broadband plan. So that's one portion of it. The other, and this is something that is going to bring relief for the telecom sector, is rationalizing the various levies and taxes on telecom firms. So this includes the likes of the spectrum usage charges, the USOF levy, that is the Universal Service Obligation levy, license fees, and several other taxes which fall on digital communication equipment, infrastructure and services are going to be rationalized. We don't know how, we don't know the exact details in terms of the implementation, but that is a broad aim. They're also proposing adoption of optimal pricing of spectrum waves, and they are going to now start recognizing mid-band spectrum, particularly in the 3 gigahertz to 24 gigahertz, which is basically used for next-gen networks. That is something that is a critical focus of promoting next-gen network to ensure that India is able to adopt 5G services by the year 2020. We also have with us Rajan Matthew, the Director General of COAI, to help us understand this further. Rajan, thanks for joining in. You know, a lot of the targets that have been set by the new telecom policy that has been cleared by the cabinet today are aspirational. So, for instance, how realistic is the target of $100 million of fresh investment, 40 new lakh jobs by 2022?
So, first of all, the industry is very supportive and very enthusiastic by the new telecom policy. We've had a very wide-ranging set of inputs and consultations in the process. All stakeholders were involved. So this is really an excellent document that has come out. So the 3 critical areas that the industry is very keenly focused on is, one, the whole issue of the financial health of the industry and getting it back to the means by which it can attract the $100 billion or so US dollars required to make all of these objectives a reality. That cannot be achieved unless you have financial health, because the government has very clearly said this must all come in from the private sector. And when you look at the private sector, the domestic banks are not in a great shape to lend this amount of money. So you're really looking at foreign direct investments. And so when you look at that, clearly financial health of the industry is going to be a key ingredient of having to attract the 100+ billion, which we think is a rather conservative number. So clearly that is good news. Secondly is the whole issue of spectrum. And I think the reporter rightly said that when you look at having to connect everybody and afford them speeds of 2 Mbps and 10 Mbps or 20 Mbps of speed and 2 gigabits, you will need at a minimum per operator 100 to 600 Mbps of spectrum.
Yeah.
At today's pricing, if you look at the TRI recommendation of 492 crore rupees per megahertz, you can see that spectrum pricing has to be addressed. So appropriately, that is being addressed as well. And right away, another critical element also being addressed. So 3 very critical elements included, and we are very, very glad that the cabinet has now approved this policy.
Rajan, just to play the devil's advocate here, there are a couple of points that have been mentioned in the document. For instance, the point you raised about spectrum. They say that the aim is to develop a transparent, normative and fair policy for spectrum assignments and allocation, making spectrum available to be equipped for the new broadband era. From an implementation perspective, what exactly does this entail from the government side?
So, first of all, I think it means international harmonization, because everybody recognizes that the future investments are going to not only come from 4G, but in the 5G area, for which India has taken a claim to take a lead. There, we're talking about the supply of spectrum, and fortunately, those spectrum bands have been identified. So the government needs to go forward in terms of formalizing those spectrum bands that will be made available for 5G in the quantum that's required. The second point, obviously, is in the pricing of that spectrum. That's where the real hub comes, and I think the high-level 5G committee that was formulated has recommended that a special committee be set up to study this particular issue, because the old methodology of pricing is simply not going to get us there. So I think that is well in place, and so we will go forward under that rubric.
Rajan, recognizing the mid-band spectrum, which is basically the 3 gigahertz to 24 gigahertz range, how significant would that be to ensure 5G implementation?
Absolutely essential. So first of all, the present band of 3.2 to 3.6 gigahertz is there. Pricing, obviously, as recommended by TRI, is going to be the challenge there. But if you look at the next band, where globally everybody is harmonizing around, it's in the 26 gigahertz to the 34 gigahertz range. And so the Indian government has identified that it is now needed to be adopted as policy and rolled out and made available to the industry.
Okay, talking about financial health, very quickly, Rajan, the one point that COI and several telecom operators have been fighting for is reduction of the various levies that telecom operators are imposed on. So as a part of the new telecom policy, they do want to rationalize levies across the board, including spectrum usage charges, including the annual license fee and the USOF. By how much do you reckon the levy will go down now? Do you expect this to come below 10%?
We would hope so, because, again, you have to have critical momentum. Doing it in dribs and drabs, dying by 1,000 cuts is not going to get you there. So I think some bold movement is necessary. And the TRI has basically said, take your 5% SUC, provide over a 2 or 3 year reduction to 1%, take your 8%, move to 3% in the next year or so. So those timeframes have already been recommended. And if you can begin the movement towards those objectives, I think the industry will see some light at the end of the tunnel. Financial institutions will see this as momentum to start lending to the industry. And I think we can see a way forward.
So by the end of the year, we should see that impact of the decrease in levies?
This is an election year, so I don't know what is going to be the outcome. If the government is bold enough to take those steps by the end of the year, that will be wonderful and welcomed by the industry, and will get us earlier on the road to recovery. So, yes, if it happens, that would be great news for the industry.
Okay, that's a broad 2020 target then. Rajan, thanks very much for joining us. So Ritu, a lot of points of clarity over there brought out by Rajan. It does seem like a comprehensive document, and as the COI head is saying, it isn't aspirational. It is something that has been set out over a period of 5 years, and hopefully we should get to see some kind of results over the next 1 year itself.